The group finally arrived at school. Some looked more worried than others as this was going to be their final year at Sorami High School. To the group's surprise, they saw two new transfer students, and they were none other than the Harpies, and flying in the sky was Oregano, who landed saying that she too was coming to school. Seemingly realizing that his peace and quiet will totally be shattered, the smile on Tamaki's face quickly faded. He asked the Harpies why and how they were here. Master said it's okay if we want to stay here, plus he said this is a good way to keep an eye on you, Tamaki. A look of shock ran through Tamaki's face first, but it quickly faded as he thought back on his previous and not too bad an experience with the Harpies. As he reflected back on those memories, he by chance caught one of the Harpies' older sister's eyes. She looked away shyly, and Tamaki started walking towards both of the sisters, placing his hands on both their shoulders. "Do you know you never told me your names?" A look of sadness was quickly exchanged between the two sisters. "We don't have names." Tamaki then turned back to the other angeloids and back to the Harpies. "You two can decide on your own names then." The two nodded back at Tamaki, and the older of the two Harpies blushed when Tamaki smiled at her. Everyone in the group noticed this, and she was quick to hide it. Entering the school, a shocked audience of other pupils stood and looked on as Tamaki walked in with all these beautiful girls. Questions from the crowd arose attention amongst the group. Which one is his girlfriend? The angeloids were quick to ask what a girlfriend is, and Mikako didn't waste any time not explaining. Mikako stated that a girlfriend is a boy's most treasured girl who he values above all. Usually, it's one girlfriend, but some people have more than one girlfriend. Shigata saw that Mikako was stirring up trouble and was quick to cover her mouth, because the next scene was of angeloids and Sohara trying to find out who Tamaki thought was his girlfriend. Tamaki had found himself once again backed into a corner, but reverted to the offensive, asking the girls who would want him as her boyfriend. The tables were truly turned as no one wanted to answer, but out of the blue Aika arose and Nymph answered and said, "I would want to have Master as my boyfriend." Astria and Sohara were about to admit their feelings too, but were too slow. Chaos was standing there holding Astria's hand and had reverted back to her child form. She tugged at Astria, asking, "What do you do with a boyfriend?" Sohara answered, "You kiss and do stuff together and love each other." Chaos looked at Tamaki and thought of a time she wanted to kiss Tamaki and she still wanted to kiss him, but were these really her feelings or Hari's? She tugged at Sohara. "I want to be Master's girlfriend too." A look of shock ran through Sohara and Astria's faces as they tried to find an answer to why she could not be Tamaki's girlfriend. Sohara told Chaos that she was just a little girl and couldn't date Tamaki, and Chaos took this to mind and transformed into her adult form. A look of failure was on Sohara's face, but Astria triumphantly brought up an answer for Chaos. "You need to know how to make each other happy." "Well, do you know how to make Tamaki happy?" Chaos was confused at first but was quick to find an answer. "I am happy to be around Mr., so I am happy. But what makes Mr. happy?" Seeming to have a look of defeat on her face, Astria and Sohara began to celebrate, but their celebration was cut short when Chaos suddenly blasted off, leaving a giant hole in the school's roof. Astria thought it would be best that she does not follow, as she might learn better about the world this way, and Sohara agreed, thinking to herself that Astria had the solution. Meanwhile, up in the skies, Chaos was flying high and flying fast, thinking of what made Tamaki the most joy. Then she remembered all the times that she had spied on him. Times like when he was in his room looking at his porno mags, busy groping girls, his love for girls' panties, and how he liked to see girls naked. She landed outside the house and went into Tamaki's room and found all that he treasures out in the open. Back at school, everyone was amazed to find that all the new angeloids had been moved into his class. Clearly, He could tell by the look on Mikako's face that she had pulled some strings. Oregano had taken the seat next to Tamaki to be closer to Tamaki. This was made clear, as during class she constantly moved her desk closer and closer to Tamaki. This started to bother Tamaki, and by the time he was awoken from his nap, Oregano was right next to Tamaki. She lay her head on the table and then put her forehead right against Tamaki's. Tamaki opened his eyes and looked into Oregano's eyes. She blushed, and Tamaki started to smile back shyly. Aika, Eros and Nymph were looking at Oregano trying to go for Tamaki. Both of their reactors started to hurt. Nymph got up from her seat mumbling, "He's mine, get away from him, he is mine." Oregano looked back at Nymph walking towards her, and she covered Tamaki's eyes with some panties and turned to Nymph. Oregano prepared her attack, unveiling under her school blazer an arsenal of weapons. With this quick change in the tides, Nymph was brought to a sudden stop, rattled by the amount of firepower Oregano is packing. Nymph starts to back away slowly till she gets to the hallway door, and she started to bolt away as quickly as she could on foot, as Tamaki had told her not to fly at school. Behind her, Oregano had been told by Tamaki the exact same thing, but with Tamaki still occupied by panties in class, she completely disregarded it. Back in class, the teacher, after a moment of shock, took the panties away from Tamaki, but not without a fight. With one swift karate chop to the head, Tamaki was put down and the teacher confiscated the panties. Aika Eros was now finally alone with Tamaki in the front of the class and the harpies with Astria at the back of the class. She moved up to sit next to Tamaki and put her hand around him. He was very hesitant but submitted. Aika Eros drew him close to her, and the rest of the class looked on in shock, thinking, "How can such a pervert have a girl like that?" Sohara looked on and felt a surge of jealousy piercing her heart. Emotions were starting to get high, and Aika Eros asked the teacher to be excused from class and dragged Tamaki out of the class with her. Astria, Sohara and the harpies looked on as they left the class. The school halls were empty as most of the people were in class. Aika Eros was dragging Tamaki to the roof where it would be just the two of them. Back in the class, Astria was feeling the need to be with Tamaki but hid her feelings deep inside, but it wasn't easy. On the roof, it was just the two of them, and looking deep into each other's eyes, Aika Eros smiled at Tamaki. This is one of the few times she had smiled at him. He looked into her eyes and drew her in for a closer embrace. She started to blush and looked away with a shy, innocent face. Tamaki reached out for her face and tipped her head. He started to go in for a kiss, and Aika Eros was shy and tried to back off, but Tamaki already had his arms wrapped around her waist. He started to kiss her and she wrapped her arms around him. After passionately kissing, Aika Eros and Tamaki sat down while Aika Eros lay down on Tamaki's lap. He was running his fingers through Aika Eros's hair and holding her hand. Before they knew it was the end of the school day, but the two were still on the roof. The rest of the group had headed home, and Tamaki thought it best they headed home too. A thought ran through Tamaki's head, and he remembered that he had never taken Aika Eros on a date alone, so he helped her up and held her hand. The plan was to go on a date at that very moment. She locked hands with him and laid her head on his shoulder as they boarded a bus headed for town. The date went well. The scene was romantic as it could be. The two went to the movies, the night festival music show, and after it all, they went to the crater where the two met. They sat down looking at the stars with Aika Eros resting between Tamaki's legs with his arms wrapped around her. Back at home, Nymph starts to worry about where Alpha and Tamaki are and conducts a quick radar scan of the area. She sees where they are but decides not to interrupt, thinking, "I guess I could give her some time with Tamaki." Laying by the crater, Tamaki remembers that the school had a dance planned and the prez said if he is not there he was going to get punished. A range of visions appeared in Tamaki's head, thinking about what kind of punishment prez had planned for him. Tamaki jumped up and helped Teika Uros up. She felt a great joy knowing that Tamaki was holding her arm. They got home early, still with time to spare before the school dance to welcome the new semester. As they entered the house, they found the rest of the group ready, including the Harpies, who to everyone's surprise had decided that they would be moving in with Tamaki. A sudden shock ran through the group, but this mostly affected Nymph, who still hadn't fully forgiven the Harpies for what they did to her before. She looked away from the Harpies and turned to Tamaki, asking him who he was going to take to the dance tonight. This seemed to be a difficult choice for Tamaki, as Astria, Chaos, the Harpies, Sohara, Hiro, and Nymph were all prepared. Mikako and Shigata stepped in, seemingly trying to make the situation worse than it was already. You know you can only take one. Teika Uros walked away, telling the rest of the group that she was going to get changed into something the prez had given her. The prez smile to the rest of the group was rather causing a mood of unease in the group, but while everyone was distracted, the older one of the Harpies went up to Tamaki. She was really nervous and was about to say something to Tamaki, but before she could, Tamaki said to her, "Hey, it's really good to have you two back. When I saw you two get, you know." He couldn't finish his sentence but felt the need to embrace the Harpies, and so he did. He held them so tightly and close to him and quickly found himself in tears. The Harpies hugged him back, but one of them was hugging him much more tightly and passionately than the other, and when it was time to let go, one of the Harpies didn't till she noticed everyone was looking and was quick to let go. Teika Uros was done preparing and came out of the room looking stunning. Tamaki's jaw dropped, but not only his. Sohara noticed the way Tamaki was looking at Teika Uros and felt envy, wishing he would give the same look he gives Teika Uros to her. Chaos smiled oddly at Tamaki. He asked her why the odd face, and he immediately felt suspicious, but she continued to smile. Nymph rushed to Tamaki's side but heard the word midget being mumbled behind her, and to her displeasure it was Oregano, who was hiding behind the prez. And after being chased around the hole by her at school, Nymph felt a sudden need for vengeance. Teika Uros went and claimed one of Tamaki's arms for herself by locking arms with him. Nymph remembered her first objective, which was to claim one of Tamaki's arms. She quickly turned back her attention to Tamaki but found Oregano had already claimed the other arm. Thinking and remembering what happened between her and Tamaki, Nymph opts to ride on Tamaki's back. She hops and he doesn't seem to mind at all. She wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his back. Everyone was ready to go, and all of the Angeloids and Sohara seemed to have wanted to be Tamaki's only date. They were finally on their way to the school dance with Oregano and Teika Uros locked onto Tamaki's arms and Nymph on Tamaki's back, but walking at the back of the group were Astria, Hiro, Sohara, and the Harpies. Shouting came from a distance behind the group. It was Daedalus on her hoverboard. She got to the group instantly, but Tamaki was having none of it and told her, "It's a dance, you're supposed to dance, so no hoverboards." She slowly stepped off her board, but her legs were weak. She hadn't used them in a while. As soon as she set foot on the ground, she lost her balance and found herself falling to the ground, but Tamaki grabbed her hand, pulling her up before she could hit the ground. Daedalus was pulled up and Oregano begrudgingly gave up her spot on one of Tamaki's arms so that she could use him as support. She was still unbalanced, so Oregano put Tamaki's arm around Daedalus's waist, but not without a few, good, mumbled words as she wanted Tamaki to herself. Nymph saw the frustration on Oregano's face and opted to add insult to injury and started making faces at her. Oregano walked faster till she was ahead of the group, defeated by Nymph this time. Mikako, up to her old tricks, noticed Oregano's liking of Tamaki and started to plot one of her schemes. Shigata saw Mikako already plotting and went to give Tamaki a brief but not very informative warning about the plot against him. They finally arrived at school. The dance had already begun and everyone was quick to jump and join in. Nymph hopped off Tamaki's back and started to dance. The atmosphere was very lively, but Tamaki noticed something in the corner of his eye. The older sister of the harpies was standing by herself in the corner of the hall. Nymph and Ikaros knew what to do and gave a little push to Tamaki in the older sisters of the harpies' direction and gave him a thumbs up. He didn't seem to know what the two were on about, but his main focus was to get to the harpy's older sister, to get her feeling better. Tamaki rushed up to her and grabbed her hand, dragging her to the dance floor. She wanted to resist, but after a glance at Tamaki's smile her worries faded and the two began to dance. The music was exciting at first, blasting energetic movements through the crowd, but the announcement came through: grab that special someone for the slow dance. The harpy's sister was waiting to anticipate that Tamaki would let her go and head to Ikaros or Nymph, but he didn't and kept on dancing with her. Everyone looked on as the two were the only ones left on the dance floor. Tamaki whispered into her ear, "Kaibo." She repeated the word, seemingly confused, "Kaibo." But he turned to her and looked at her in the eyes. "Kaibo should be your name, because you're precious." Kaibo looked at Tamaki with an astonished face and hugged him, bursting into tears. "Thank you, Tamaki." Sora and Nymph ran up to the two, immediately assuming Tamaki had tried something, but they saw all was fine and Kaibo was still in Tamaki's arms crying. Her sister showed up and Tamaki quickly directed his attention toward her. "Kikona." She too also was confused until he explained. Kikona jumped into his arms and before he knew it both of the sisters were in his arms. He had a flashback of how he got the names and he remembered him and Ikaros picking them when they lay next to the crater. The night went on and most of the people had left. It was clear that the humans in the group were tired, so Mikako decided that it was time they went home. Sora had been sleeping earlier, so Astria and Chaos had taken her home. Hiro had gone with them so she could go to her house after she had dropped them off. Daedalus had gone home early to go finish her project with oregano for the night. So along the road, Ikaros, Nymph and the harpies had decided to walk, and Tamaki was resting on Nymph and Ikaros' shoulders as they carried him off. The harpies were just too happy to experience the nightlife in the town and were not helping Nymph and Ikaros carry Tamaki home. Tamaki was half asleep and Nymph was trying to have a little fun and asked him a question in his sleep. "Tamaki, who do you love between me and Ikaros?" It fell silent for a minute and then he answered, "I love the both of you," as he completed his sentence between yawns. Nymph shied away for a second and replied, "That is good to know, isn't it, Alpha?" Ikaros smiled back, but they both knew only one of them could have Tamaki due to Japan's laws. They got home just in time, but while they were a small distance away when they spotted a large structure opposite Tamaki's house. Next to this massive structure was Chaos, Astria, Hiro, Mikako, Shigata, Daedalus, and Oregano. Mikako was smiling, holding a grenade launcher pointed at Tamaki's house, and as Tamaki awakened, the sudden realization that his home was going to be destroyed got the best of him and he went after Mikako, but it was too late as she blew his home sky high. Still, in shock, he stood there motionless, screaming out, not for the beloved home he grew up in since he was a child, but for all the porno mags he had inside. Daedalus came to him with an apology but then turned to her big mysterious structure that had been hidden under a giant sheet the whole time. Oregano started to pull off the giant sheet, unveiling a new house, just a little bigger than Tamaki's. But it was much bigger. Daedalus, with a massive grin on her face, pushed everyone inside. She stood there shouting, "Welcome to your new home, the Synapse Embassy on Earth." Nymph questioned how this possible, but as Daedalus explained that with the defeat of the leader of the Synapse she had regained more liberties. Daedalus started to laugh ecstatically all of a sudden, and Nymph and Shigata immediately knew that she was hiding something. The mood started to settle as they explored more and more of the embassy, which seemed to be bigger on the inside than the outside, which was probably the work of Synapse technology. There was no telling how big it was. Nymph had a sudden realization and asked Daedalus just who is going to be the ambassador. She immediately replied, the person who currently has the longest serving and most angeloids on Earth. Everyone in the group looked at Tamaki waiting for him to give his reply on the offer, but before he could, Daedalus had already decided and appointed him. He did not even try and refuse it as he was just too tired and asked for where his room was. Daedalus pointed him in the direction as she was still admiring her work. He slowly crawled to his room as he was too tired. Entering his room, he never paid attention to his surroundings. Tamaki took off most of his clothes, but he could pay attention to what he took of. This included his boxers. Tonight he was sleeping in the nude. He hopped into his bed and went to sleep, but because he didn't pay attention to his surroundings, he never saw that Chaos was in his bedroom too, and she had her own plans. It was early morning on a Saturday and Tamaki awoke to find him and Chaos spooning naked in bed together. She was in her adult form. He was quick to bolt out of bed, but before he could leave she stopped him with a guilt trip. "Master, you never touch me like you touch the others. Why?" Tamaki didn't have a straight answer and told her she was just a little girl and should stop thinking like an adult. But Chaos was older than him, he thought. But before he could finish his sentence, she popped out of bed and pulled him back into bed. Tamaki knew that she was a little girl and not, but she was in an adult's body, and he started to get confused. But his perverted ways won him over. He started to reach for Chaos's boobs and there was a loud knock on the door. It was Astria. She knew that Chaos had not been in her room and wondered where she was. Astria opened Tamaki's door with hesitation and found him groping his sister. There were a few loud bangs before it went quiet in the room. Blood started to flow out from under the door and all those who were outside thought Tamaki had passed. Nymph had heard the whole fight as she was on a lower floor of the embassy watching her soaps, and a thought ran through her head. Now that this place is the Synapse Embassy, me and Alpha can both be with Tamaki. After all, it is allowed at the Synapse. A joyful grin took over her face with this sudden realization. While upstairs, Kaiba burst through the door to find Tamaki bruised and battered and immediately took him under her care. She flew off and dropped him by the hospital and waited by his bedside as he was recovering for the rest of the weekend. Whilst he was sleeping, she took a moment to hop into the bed with him and kissed him. He finally opened his eyes on Sunday only to see Kaiba there alone lying next to him in the hospital bed. She tried to quickly touch his hand and let go, but he grabbed her hand and held on gently. "Thanks for coming, Kaiba." She looked at him smiling and tearful. "I never left." Tamaki smiled at her and she blushed. The others had not even shown up because of Astria, who was lecturing them on what Tamaki had done, till the very moment that she heard Chaos say she asked him to do those things to her. In a few mere seconds, it was decided that Chaos needed to go to a school with people around her age where she could learn to fit in better. At first, it was an easy decision to make, but as they put more thought into it, this seemed like it was the worst option. Through the doors of the embassy appeared Tamaki, who had seemed to be out of the hospital earlier because he heard about the situation from Kaiba. He suggested that she be taken to a school her age that could be set up, which was exactly what the rest of the group had suggested. Knowing that there was no other choice and this would be a good experience, they decided to do it. Kaiba said, "Tamaki, you do know that just because she looks like a little girl doesn't mean she is." He stopped for a second and thought about it, then asked, "Why was I beaten up?" The girls all went quiet, looking everywhere but at him. He knew he had